Hello and welcome to the Look-See in February 2024. This is a bit of a look at what's happening in the world and the things we would do well to think deeply about. The pressure on America and the Western countries has continued to pile up with special force around the issues of Russia and the Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin interview. The problem of President Biden and his mental incompetence, the invasion of the illegal migrants coming over the southern border, and issues around money, food, housing, and energy. Regarding money, I didn't cover anything financial this month because there were too many other things to discuss, but I will say the bond market looked like it was going down by the first week in March or around the first week in March. So get your head ready for that because we are often the cause of our own stress. It is good to pull away from time to time, step back, and take stock of where we're at, what is coming at us, and where we appear to be going. So for this month, let's call this a taking stock of things look-see. It's not all pleasant, but if it moves you to look at and prepare for big change, that's good. And we will end on a good note. So let's begin. Number one, on January 30th, I gave myself directions to have a dream showing me when the collapse would begin in such a way that almost everyone would see it. I had a dream that night that I was looking at a calendar page showing the month of February 2024, when three of the dates, you know how they have those little boxes with a number in the corner. So three of those old boxes detached from the calendar page and went tumbling away as if caught in a tornado. The first date to fall out was February 5th. The next was February 8th, and the last was February 11th. The feeling with the 5th was on your mark. The feeling with the 8th was get set. And the feeling on the 11th was go. And after that, there was this feeling that everything was caught in the storm and blowing about, which just got worse and worse, and nothing was ever the same again. I look back on those dates now, and I think February 5th was when Tucker's interview was announced. February 8th was when the interview was released, and now we're tumbling forward in the big winds of change. Number two. Before the Tucker Carlson Vladimir Putin interview was released, I was full of questions about what they might talk about. Was Putin really ill with only a short time to live? Something that we've heard repeatedly over the last few years. If that were the case, would he announce it? Would he have a hand-picked successor to whom he was leaving instructions to bomb the hell out of the U.S. if we hadn't come to our senses by some future date? Was Putin going to openly expose the biolabs and other corruption in Ukraine? Well, maybe he wouldn't bother with that because we already knew about the labs. Was he going to announce the fact that he had been working with ETs from somewhere in the galaxy? That would have been interesting, but I didn't think it would change anything. Unless he was going to introduce somebody who is obviously another kind of human from somewhere else and had the ET demonstrate his abilities and discuss ET technology. Was Putin going to step down? I hope not. Who could replace his well thought out, measured ways? And who else would have his restraint, his attitude of just rolling with the punches, and his ability to come to his feet again and again without missing a beat? If he were to be replaced by Dmitry Medvedev, we would soon have nuclear war. And speaking of nuclear war, would he be announcing that he was going to drop a few nuclear bombs on the US and Israel in order to end the slaughter in Ukraine? That didn't really seem like a good trade. Why slaughter 200 million people in the US in order to avoid the deaths of 100,000 in Ukraine? Was he going to announce something financial or respond to our attempts to steal $300 billion of Russia's money and give it to Ukraine? And then the interview happened. If there's anything at all that comes across in Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin, it is the stark difference between the cavalier arrogance and duplicity with which the U.S. handles its treaties, agreements, and relationships, and the forward-thinking clarity and cooperative relationships sought by Russia. It was sad to see Russia's attempts to establish a good working relationship with us rejected out of hand again and again. It was the same kind of sadness I used to feel in grade school watching a bully pick on someone who didn't deserve it. Another thing that struck me deeply was that Russia did not appear to be interested in reducing the number of people on the planet by 90%. This is something I used to laugh at 20 years ago and now look at with horror, because it appears this is the goal of whoever's making the decisions for the US and the West. And it looks like they're succeeding. However, Putin seemed to be genuine in his interest in maintaining the well-being of everyone on the planet. Russia is not interested in global war, and in the talk and speeches given by Putin that I've listened to, he is consistent and sincere in asking, why should we fight? The world is changing. It's too complex and change happens much faster now. Where is the balance? He's consistent in holding out an olive branch and saying, let's talk. Do you want to ensure the future? This is the only way to security for all. And what is our response? It's cynicism, followed by lies, deception, more weapons and war, more evasion of reality. As Putin pointed out, we appear to be intent on destroying ourselves. Is that what we want? We keep putting enough pressure on Russia to cause it to break up into smaller pieces, to balkanize it, just like they did in Czechoslovakia and tried to do in Romania. But that is exactly what is happening to us right now. Putin asked Carlson some key questions like, well, if there's no silver bullet solution, what is the answer? Where are the power centers in the US? As if he was asking, who's running the country, the government or the elites? He also asked, why are you destroying your economy and your dollar? What are you thinking by letting your debt go to $33 trillion? Putin also pointed out some critical flaws. It is a mistake to use the dollar as a foreign policy weapon. He pointed out also that everyone needs energy, and we can have cheap energy or expensive energy, as if he was saying, take your pick. He also pointed out that the U.S. suffers from self-conceit. And he emphasized a couple times that humanity must consider the future. And through it all, Putin's love for the motherland was obvious. Where is our government's love for our country and our land? Number 3. I went to look at Washington, D.C. to see what was happening there, and the first thing I saw was plotting against Tucker Carlson. A few people were intensely angry that he went to Moscow and talked to Putin. I thought there was a special fury around that subject coming from South Carolina. Number 4. When the people in Washington weren't obsessing about Tucker, the topic of money was front and center. Our representatives want just one more paycheck from Ukraine, and they are telling themselves they will then quit money laundering through Ukraine. What do we need to see here? Well, for those who are still naive, the money goes to Ukraine, where a portion of it goes directly into the pockets of corrupt politicians and military over there. And then the money circles back to U.S. companies in orders, fake orders, for new military equipment. Some of these U.S. companies take chunks of that money right off the top, while the rest goes to inflate the value of their shares, shares often owned by the U.S. politicians who sent them the money in the first place. These companies also donate large sums to political parties in D.C., and thus, in a roundabout way, the money sent to Ukraine is really a paycheck for D.C. politicians. I could not see the usefulness of just one more paycheck laundered through Ukraine, but it looked like they wanted this to go through because it would tide them over as the financial system went through some big changes. Number 5. There was grave concern in early March about getting approval to raise the debt ceiling and temporarily fund the continued operation of the government. It was more than grave concern, actually. It looked like panic was increasing to freakout level. Boosted by Tucker's interview of Putin, which began changing the attitudes in the U.S., a lot of attitudes in the U.S. To complicate this, it looked like a late winter storm got in the way of voting on the funding bill. And so I have to ask, what do we need to see here? Well, we might make it through the next raising of the debt, but if we don't, and if the bond market goes down, you need to be ready to deal with quite a financial storm. Number 6. I was listening to Stephen Gardner last week, and he too was talking about the issue of sending another $60 billion to Ukraine. This triggered the thought in me, is anybody letting the people in Congress know that what they're doing is not okay? Is anybody in Congress listening to us? I don't know if it's worth it to try contacting our representatives in D.C. because it looks like they aren't listening. Or maybe they don't care what we think. They act like they are working for someone else, following the orders of someone else, even though we are paying them. If our financial system were a car, they would be charged with reckless driving. Does anybody out there realize that they are spending us into oblivion? That's our money and our future they're borrowing from. Number 7. It should be clear by now that Joe Biden is president in name only. This grieves me intensely. It probably grieves a lot of others as well. Watching him and listening to his talk or his orders is crazy making. I was thinking about this and wondering who was behind him. And as has happened several times in the past, Obama floated into my field of concern. And then George Soros. So I'll share something I saw about Soros and something I read a long time ago. It was about Soros as a teen. He was maybe 13 or 14 years old, and his immediate family had all been killed in World War II. The shock of this was overwhelming to him, but it appeared there was never any time for reflection, grieving, or healing. Because he was still so young, he went to live with his uncle, who was selling out the Jews, taking their hard-earned money and assets, and very proud of it. It was as if the uncle had found a way to survive the war and get a bit of positive protection from the Nazis running things. He was completely uncaring about what was happening to other human beings. The young George went with his uncle regularly as the uncle went about his work. At such a critical time of grief, loss, and the struggle to survive, George ended up being steeped in the attitude of do what you have to do to survive. Forget about the human factor and profit as much as possible in the process. The long-term result for the young Soros was this weird blend of shock and horror at the loss of his family, as well as what was happening to his country and his people in general, combined with an ungodly profit motive. Somewhere along the way, these factors solidified into a series of decisions. The first decision was to destroy nations and their borders so that they could never mount another war. The second was to make the most money possible while doing so. And the third was to use that money to take those nations down while also insulating himself against the pain of loss by replacing love with money. This attitude actually made him the perfect stooge for hidden puppeteers seeking to control the planet. Soros' decision to destroy the nations of Earth fit their agenda perfectly. It didn't look like George had any plan to create a human farm of selectively modified individuals that had our human resilience and technological skills, but with enough naivete and ignorance needed to make us the perfect slaves. But that part was to be handled by the corporate network that was being put in place to hire people and keep them busy. Too busy to figure out that humans were being modified, shipped, and traded in this part of the galaxy. Anyway, I look at the life of George Soros and think, wow, all of that potential to use those billions of dollars to make individual lives better was first hoarded and then pissed away on a project to destroy nations and governments. The ruse was to use NGOs to pretend he was making a difference. But when you look under the covers, there is nothing but a naked plan to bring down nations and their governments. Why didn't he use that money to feed everyone and make sure they had high-density nutrition? Why didn't he use that money to provide electricity for everyone on the planet? Or clean water? Or research into technology that was beneficial at every level, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? Why didn't he use his money to demand advanced spiritual development for those who were interested in becoming mayors, governors, presidents, and politicians? Why didn't he support science and research that corrected our history and brought our understanding of the universe into alignment with goals that were bigger than mealy-minded money-grubbing control? We could have gotten off the planet that way. Why didn't he provide relevant education that taught people first how to take care of the body and maintain or restore good health, stay in balance mentally and emotionally, and take care of the planet in ways that allowed nature to work her magic instead of destroying the natural world? Number 8. Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected any ceasefire agreements from Hamas and vowed to fight until absolute victory has been achieved. I have to wonder what his definition of absolute victory consists of. Does it mean total obliteration? Various refugees and reporters who know the situation personally in Gaza have said that Hamas does not really represent the Palestinian people and never really has. Hamas is a front group for somebody, and it's just using people for the usual things: money, power, greed, grand plans, things of that sort. There have even been claims that Israel was working with Hamas to create this false flag invasion so that Israel would have an excuse to clear Gaza for its own purposes. When we dig a little deeper, it's not too difficult to discover the real reasons for Bibi Netanyahu's war. He wants control of the oil that was discovered off the coast of Gaza, oil that belongs to the Palestinian people. And Netanyahu is also part of a cabal of people who plan to build a new Suez-type canal that runs right through Gaza and will be called the Ben Gurion Canal. And Bibi wants control of the shipping that will be routed through that canal to supply Europe. Control of shipping lanes is very lucrative. If we step back and look at the world, we see a long, long pattern of people who want to be in power, moving things around in ways that greatly uproot the lives of hundreds of millions of people. What is the message to those of us watching this activity? What do we see when we step back far enough and take a good look? We see that the power mongers go to great lengths to move us into positions that will feed them, route resources to them, and increase their control. We saw this in the Industrial Revolution. We were coaxed off the land and into cities by the promise of jobs, money, and an easier life. But what was really happening? It was what I just pointed out. Being coaxed off the land to work for peanuts while the power mongers got fat, rich, and happy, took over the land, and commandeered the resources. Our way of life, our homes, our tools, relationships, technologies, all are regularly upended as we are moved around the planet, told to think this, believe in that, spend our time doing X, Y, Z, and accept that, oh, it's always been this way. This is the way it should be because the power people say so. Now it's happening again. You see it plain as day in Gaza as Israel pretends they need to fight a war against people who already had nothing, especially no weapons. In this particular instance, Netanyahu is the one calling the shots and the Palestinians are the pawns. But we've seen it with the war in Libya, the war in Syria, the migrations into Europe, and now the people pouring over the southern border of the U.S. There's a bigger message being sent here via Netanyahu's war, and it is that we need to smarten up. It is a mistake to settle down, dig in, build an entire city, set up cultures based on entertainment, fake food, and routines that feed money and power to someone we don't even know. We need to see how we are being milked. We also need to see that when the milk cow goes dry, the power mongers slaughter it. They begin slowly, moving things around a little at a time, changing everything and causing great distress and disruption. Here we go again. Like I said, we need to smarten up. We need to envision lives that are not tied to money and illusions of an easy life. We need to be real and take responsibility for ourselves. Number 9. OMG. If you have not listened to the interview between Michael Yon and Stuart Turley on Stuart's Twitter channel, Conversations in Energy, you are missing some pretty vital information. It's a long piece, about an hour and 49 minutes, but if you're willing to face the truth and you want to understand what is happening regarding the stream of migrants coming over our southern border, the real estate ghetto development just north of Houston with 200,000 migrants housed in it, the Chinese soldiers coming into the U.S. by blending in with the migrants, using them for cover, the Houthis and the Hezbollah waiting in Venezuela, the threats to our grid, water, and food supply, and the fact that pandemics are usually followed by famine and war, then this is the interview to watch. Wow. Some pertinent comments made by Yon, or one of them I thought was very, very pertinent, was, will we have an election? Why would they have another election? We're way past that. He points out the problems with the last 2 elections and then asks, what are we going to do? Sue them? This is a very unsettling question because it's clear that our courts are corrupted. We are out of options. In Jan's view, we might as well quit worrying about useless accusations that claim someone is sowing fear or creating division. Why? Because the invasion is already underway. Number 10. After listening to Michael Yon, I thought I would go and hear what Scott Kesterson had to say. Scott has a channel called Bards of War. And Scott's message of the day was, engagement is the principle of success in this fight. So he got me to thinking about how many people were able to be engaged in this fight. And that led to another moment of taking stock of where we are at. So here's a few things that came up. 8 million illegals have come into our country with the expectation that they will be taken care of by us. What will happen when they realize that they have been played? They have been used. How many people have died or been disabled by the recent injection in the arm program? How many children disappear each year into the clutches of criminals and sold into sex slavery or tortured to produce adrenochrome? How many people are on illegal drugs and unable to be relied on to be coherent and contribute to helping the situation in this country? How many people are dependent on legal drugs from pharmaceutical companies to stay alive? How many people are healthy and have the physical, mental, and emotional energy to look at what is coming and make good decisions about what to do or how to prepare? How many people are looking at the next month or the month after or the month after that and making plans as if they will be able to do the same things then that they have always done? All of this then brought me to figure out roughly how many able-bodied people do we really have to work with to count on to become engaged in this effort to rescue the U.S. So, after a check of the population clock to see how many of us there were here in the U.S., I did some calculations. There are 333 million people in the U.S., according to the population clock. If we divide the population into men, women, and children, there are 81 million children under the age of 20, 0 to 19, almost 58 million seniors between the ages of 65 and 100 or plus, 100 plus, and 194 million adult men and women between the ages of 20 and 65. Now, let's say that of the 194 million adults between 20 and 65, 98 million are men and 96 million are women. Let's also say that 30% of those 194 million adults got a certain injection in the arm and may now be compromised either physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. That amounts to 58 million adults that we may not be able to count on. That leaves us 136 million uncompromised adults that we could count on to work or fight or take care of others. If we divide those 136 million adults into men and women, we might have 69 million men and 67 million women who are not compromised. But taking those 136 million adults, men and women, who are not compromised by the recent thing in the arm, let's say that roughly half of them, or 68 million people, have other problems, including one or more of the following. So let's say they are so heavily biased that they do not care or pay attention to what is happening in the world and have mostly dropped out. They're uneducated and unable to engage in critical thinking or realistic assessment of what is needed. They're caught up in the woke propaganda and totally distracted from reality. They're functionally immature, or they're alcoholic, or they're obese and have difficulty moving about and have very little stamina. They are depressed and frequently suicidal. They are severely poverty-stricken and unable to contribute anything. They're basically or even severely unhealthy and lacking in energy, or have been diagnosed with a serious medical condition such as cancer, heart disease, kidney disease, high blood pressure, etc. Or they are dependent on legal pharmaceutical drugs to get through each day. They struggle with illegal drug addiction, or they struggle with autism spectrum disorder. Almost 6 million people have autism in the U.S. Who will take care of them? So now, of our original 136 million uncompromised adults, The healthy, able half we are left with is approximately 68 million adults, roughly 35 million men, and 33 million women. So if we now add together the 81 million children ages 0 to 19, the 58 million seniors between 65 and 100 years of age, the 58 million who got the injection in the arm and are compromised, and the 68 million that have other problems, we have 265 million people who need help, support, to be raised, assisted, or cared for on a daily basis. If we now take the 8 million illegals who have nothing, no food, no clothing, no housing, transportation, jobs, medical care, education, or even language skills, and add them to the 265 million already in need, we have 273 million people who need to be raised, assisted, or cared for on a daily basis, with roughly 68 million adults to provide this help, care, and support. Add a government that is collapsing, banks that are collapsing, food shortages, supply lines disappearing, and the burden of grief over what is happening in your situation, your country, or your world, and you have an impossible situation. It is one that cannot be managed, and it's destined for great difficulty. So this is the reality of what is seen when we stop and take stock of where we are at right now. Number 11. I have to make some comments of my own about the migrant situation and what I see coming. Perhaps you see it too. Paying millions of migrants to travel to the U.S. and coaxing them across our borders with wild promises of money, medical care, food, social security, citizenship, voting rights, education, free housing, and jobs ends up backfiring. The goal of Biden's government has been to drag 8 million migrants here, keep them fed and housed and quiet just long enough to get through the election, and then dump them into the streets. The plan also intends to make use of their labor at greatly reduced costs to businesses, which means their lives will not be any better than they were in the country they came from. Since most good-paying jobs are going away over the next few years, these people will be relegated to jobs like cleaning hotels and agricultural workers. At the appropriate time, there will be a pandemic or an outbreak of something that forces many of them to get shots that eventually take them out. These shots will be mandated because we will have handed over medical sovereignty to the World Health Organization. So what do we need to see here? This plan is sick. The migrants will not be happy when they discover they've been conned, been used, and the stories they heard about riches in America are not real. They don't know how long and hard Americans work to achieve security, stability, and fill their own needs. You know, those unforgiving, non-negotiable daily needs. And I don't think those people are ready to work like that. I think they've been told that everything will just be handed to them. They don't know the efforts that we have made again and again over decades to come up with at least some way of helping those who are in need, sick, or hungry. If those people coming over the border came from socialist-leaning countries where leaders stayed in power by doling out what little they had, I don't think these people will have a clue about the huge efforts that we have put into educating and training everyone so they can contribute and are not a burden on anyone. What we've accomplished hasn't just magically happened because we were touched by some fairy dust. It's been created through blood, sweat, tears, and persistence. The migrants also might not know the level of corruption we have been struggling with for the past few years, so they wouldn't know the rat's nest they've stepped into. When they are dumped, they are going to feel just as betrayed as we do. So here's the thing to think about. I wonder if we can find ways to work together with them. I wonder if we can take those millions of people and bring them to truth, get them on our side, and avoid the pain of either fighting them when they get angry at the screw job they've just had or watching them go down in another awful pandemic. Number 12. There's an awful lot of plotting and planning in the back rooms of Washington, D.C. around the best way to take out Biden and maybe the guy playing Biden, solving the problem of what to do with Biden regarding the Democratic nomination and getting rid of the guy playing Biden who could spill all of their secrets. A lot of politicians in D.C. are playing the way they're playing because they're being blackmailed. However, some of the guys are playing for keeps, for real, in a very corrupt and conniving way. These guys playing for keeps are beginning to target some of the other players that they suspect might have been caught and then put back in place with orders to continue playing their role. The white hats have done that because they're trying to catch the deep state players red-handed. And forcing some players back into their roles gives those white hats time for deeper investigation and to figure out who's hiding and pulling the strings. It looked like the deep state suspicions were growing, however, and they were planning to take out some of the players they suspect have been compromising them. Number 13. The goal of the white hats has been to collapse deep state control without collapsing the entire country. However, the citizens themselves are now very close to taking the whole thing down. Quite a few people are feeling like they don't care whether the U.S. survives or not. They're tired of the corruption, the games, the unnecessary suffering, the taxation, the interference of government into every aspect of life, where the only real job of government is to maintain a military for defense and implement laws and currencies that benefit the people. Government creep is everywhere. What are we learning here? Well, controlling education and using it to create bias, interfering in medical matters and mandating shots while promoting imaginary pandemics, disrupting science with bribes, developing invasive surveillance technologies to be used on citizens, interfering with other countries and their leadership in order to get control of their natural resources and the productivity of their people, starting wars all over the place in order to gin up business for industries based on bullets and artillery, implementing schemes in every direction for increasing taxes and fees, constantly raising prices, which undermines sustainable living, maintaining a priority of profit over people while using the American dollar as a tool of destruction that hurts all. Slowly, the American people are getting an excellent education in what government is not supposed to be doing. Number 14. Have you seen the Declaration of Military Accountability? A group of military people are fed up with the corruption in the military and have banded together, declaring that they are devoting their lives to cleaning up the corruption and bringing the criminal elements to justice. You should read it. It's just one page. But there are not many declarations of war that are as clear and focused as this document. Number 15. Since we are taking stock of possibilities, what if we decided to use whatever power we had to help ourselves? Well, what power do we have? At this point, we have only two options left to us. The first is the power to work together. Individuals who stand up will be taken out. Small groups who gather together will be prosecuted. Large groups will be infiltrated and scattered. The main thing we have left is standing together. The second option is to use the power of consciousness. And that is actually the most powerful option, but not many people have enough trust or skill in using this option. So let's look at a few practical ways to stand together. I'm going to leave out a couple things that might get me in trouble, but all of the following are very powerful if and only if we stand together and work in tandem with one another. We have the power to ignore the government as if it doesn't exist. We have the power to ignore mainstream media because this is the mouthpiece of the controllers. We have the power to stage a sit-in at home and refuse to go to work. Don't go out and group together or protest where they can easily target you. Go home and sit. It is a decentralized way of using power. We have the power to go out and buy everything we need to prepare for a long period of time when food or other things might not be available, and then not pay the credit card bill in a timely fashion, if at all. The system depends on our financial compliance. We could take as much money out of the bank as possible, collapsing the cabal banking system. We have the power to turn off our internet for 1, 2, 3 days and catch up on our sleep, our relationships, on our loving, on our need for reflection. Try it. We have the power to withhold spending, not spend a single dime for 2 days, maybe more, and deprive the elites of the money transactions that they always take a piece of. We have the power to band together and take care of one another if something bad happens. We have the power to rethink taxes. We have the power to be utterly silent and still, as if meditating privately on what must be changed and what kind of world we want to live in. We also have the power to direct consciousness toward creating that new world, leaving the old world and its would-be controllers behind. We have the power to let go of fear, wrecking their main tool of control. Let go of fear. We have the power to close or block highways with tractors and trucks, as is being done in Europe. However, as an aside, I would say I wouldn't waste even a teaspoon of good manure by dumping it on the steps of City Hall instead of in my garden. I suppose City Hall is an option, but I wouldn't do that. We have the power to follow common sense instead of senseless laws. We have the power to organize locally and network with others who are getting organized. And lastly, if money is the barrier that keeps everyone silent and in their lane, if money is what keeps the cabal going, then money will have to come down. And you should be prepared for that. Prepared to put the cabal under siege. Number 16. This is our last one. Anyone who has dealt with a Kundalini experience or a near-death experience has a pretty good idea of the kinds of things that are truly important in life. And it's not money or the ability to destroy nations so they can't make war on one another. Money is not lasting power. Development of human consciousness and all of its potentials is where lasting power can be found. That's how to prevent war. I'll close with something weirdly hopeful. The billionaire system is doomed. And so are the billionaires. Perhaps we should let them accumulate their billions in order to teach them a lesson. The lesson is that everything you create that causes harm to the people of a given reality system must be fixed or reversed by you. If we all move on up to a 4D or 5D system, then we won't have to worry about those billionaires. They will be stuck with the results of their own failures and needing to fix an awful lot of problems in the 3D realm for a very long time. And that's it for this look-see. For those who are watching or listening for the first time, the look-see is a combination of looking ahead to see what's coming and commentary on what's happening in our world. Reality is not fixed. It's very dynamic and it changes according to what we're doing with our consciousness. And that is exactly the reason for looking ahead. If we don't like the direction things are going, we can make appropriate changes in a timely way or prepare for what looks inevitable. If we see something we like, we can put some conscious attention on that outcome and help things along. In a physical reality system, you have a lot of energetic structures working together and tightly bonded to one another. Things don't change instantly unless you change the energetic relationships. And we don't do this very well yet. We are still at the stage of trying to change the material objects and their relationships. And this is why guns and bombs are the most common tool for changing relationships. Anyway, before I get too far off track, I'll just say it's important to look ahead and to assess what's happening, what can we learn, and where are we going, so we know whether or not we need to do something different. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, this is our world. We are creating it one day at a time. Create a great month.